So I guess we got thinking about really the one thing I think we all like to look at. The performance side of things is a really easy discussion when we get into it. We always think performance can be relatively outcome driven. It can be about the thing we get to or the thing we deliver against. And I suppose we ask this question about, well, what's the paradox in between well-being and performance? And actually, how should they be linked? And what does that look like then across a couple of different domains? So bearing in mind it's September, and you will have to take my apologies for this bit, I thought I'd be the first person officially to mention a few things. I'm going to hold you on it, but I suppose just to give you, again, sorry, I meant to say early, this is just who we've got on the call today. So this isn't currently who tends to get work. This is just when you're looking around this room and seeing names and hopefully some faces later, and when we begin to break out, got representatives from each of these, both sporting and business organisations, I guess, across a variety of roles. I think you all, certainly in this kind of new normal, this COVID times, we're all facing that challenge. We're all facing that challenge of how do we look after people and keep driving performance. Actually, do we think there's a benefit in terms of some of the stuff we can look to implement against our performance? So you will be speaking to people when we break out later from each of these groups. There is all of this input available, and I guess we would definitely welcome the breadth of opinion and knowledge in this room as we start to go forward and share. So what we're going to do it against, this is the Leading Edge's Performance Wellbeing Framework. I think I'm not going to I suppose, index on it now. I'm not going to give you loads of information around it, but these are the things that I think Leading Edge have been looking at for some time and pulled together across a wide group of people, both in business and sport. And these are the things that really held true over a longer period and said, well, what is the framework in this whole idea of performance wellbeing? So just have a read of them now. I think we'll explain a few later, but I guess I'll just ask you look out and just see if anything piques your interest. People talk to us is what's the role of the leader? I guess one of the things I was thinking about and wanted to put on was, well, I think the role of the leader, is it sustainable performance? So if I want you to lead for something tomorrow and it's a 24-hour period, well, maybe I'll lead differently than if it's over the long term and it's caring for the people or a group. And if it is sustainable performance, then I guess we can do it in two ways. The sporting thing is you can go in and you can drive and you can kick and you can hit and you can shove. And I've kind of had this Ben-Hur chariot driving idea where I stand on top of you and I just whip the horse. I'll hit it as hard as I can and I'll make it run as fast as I can. Or because he was a dreamy heartthrob, is it Robert Redford? That sounds a tongue twister there. It's Robert Redford in that horse whisperer role. Well, actually his performance around looking after you and caring, and actually, will I get more out of really understanding you and trying to work out how I work with you rather than push you? And I think it's understanding that maybe at times there's both. Within England Rugby, we have a big festival here. All of our academy teams they all bring a team in, so 14 different ones. Now, 3 teams were studied in this tournament, this festival. It was labelled them teams 1, 2 and 3. What we did is we devised a new scoring system for matches. So instead of saying you're going to score tries and that's how you're going to, when we said each match will be scored dependent on the quality of how well you carry a ball into contact. So basically, for those who's not interested in rugby, we said if you can get a ball in your hands and you're able to keep the ball alive, pass to someone else, get through contact, win, keep it alive, then actually you'll score more points. So every time you do it, we'll score against the skills thing. Now, we weren't really interested in the skill. We were interested in something else. And that was how well that had been explained to teams. Actually, the impact of either understanding and buying in and feeling your coaches had given you time and explanation around the topic. We're interested in the players' perception of how well they had that thing explained to them, and therefore how well they felt cared for, and whether or not that level of care actually had a performance outcome. So we had 3 teams, and actually brilliantly, one team really bought in. So team 1, they bought into it. They talked to their players about it. They said, what do you think we should do? How should we adapt? Team 2 gave some information to their players. Their players felt a bit indifferent. Yeah, we've spoken about it. We don't know too much, but we've had some information. Team 3 were basically told nothing. The players didn't feel engaged. They didn't feel they'd had any of the information they needed to go and do it. And it had a fascinating output. And we'd asked all teams to buy in. and we I think luckily had 3 different kind of levels of how interested people were. Now, look at the box on the left. So the team, where the players had felt the coaches, their leaders, had really engaged them, spent time, helped them understand, not be stressed about things. They felt cared for, and there was a direct and measurable link. I can send you the paper. It goes through some wild complications and bits of maths that I could never even dream of, but that was for the scientists to do. Direct links to performance. The players who felt more cared for had a bigger performance outcome, both in terms of the skill and in terms of actual match outcome, win-lose.
So we closed our pubs as instructed by the government on Friday the 20th of March. The country then went into lockdown on Monday the 23rd of March, and that's when our lives changed for good. And I think the 3 key objectives lend themselves very much to the paradox between performance and well-being. The first one was to ensure the financial stability and survival of the company. And actually that piece, survival, felt really, it's quite emotive. I mean, it's a strong word, but I think that left us under no illusions of this is serious. The second one was to come out stronger than the competition. And this was a nod to, we would continue with some of the strategic goals that we were setting. We continue to work on those. But this wasn't just about, subject to surviving. We wanted to be able to, we didn't want to lose the time in order to get ahead. And I think it was really key that one of the things that we kept on the agenda was leadership development, that we put in place, that we were going to do a lot of work around developing our leaders in the business. And quite often that would be the first one to be sidelined, but we didn't, we continued with it. And then the third one was to support the mental and financial well-being of our employees. So we were also, having recently had a new CEO and new owners, we were starting to launch our values and start a cultural transition. And so our values, the 5 of them, just quickly: people first, we care, we take ownership, freedom to succeed, and win, learn, and celebrate together. So with the 3 objectives and the 5 values, we decided as a team that everything we did, we would do through the lens of these. We knew that we didn't know all of the answers. We knew we wouldn't know all of the answers. This, we've heard the cliches, it's unprecedented. These are things that we've never gone through and hopefully will never go through again. But as long as we stuck true and consistently to the values and the objectives, we felt at least we'd be aligned. So I think the other thing that we established is it was okay not to know all of the answers. And again, this kind of sense of we think as leaders, we should know everything all of the time. And actually to say, I don't know, and I'll come back to you, was just really, I think people appreciated it. It's like last night when the announcement came out, we just put a note out to say, we don't fully understand or know all of the guidelines. We'll come back to you as soon as we can. We set about, the group of us set about planning the reopening. And again, we didn't know when that would be. We didn't really know what it would be because we didn't have the guidelines. We were working collaboratively across the competition, across the competitor set. And again, I think that was crucially important, that ultimately this was the survival of the industry as opposed to who could outdo somebody else. And it was I think quite, it felt quite empowering to actually work and have open conversations together collectively on behalf of the industry. We work with the UK hospitality and the pub industry to provide the government with guidelines, but not knowing what they'd accept. So we created Pub Safe, and again with that lens on coming out stronger and that lens on people first and we care, was all about making sure that when our teams came back into the pubs, we had provided them with the most protection we could, that they could be safe in their jobs and provide a safe environment for customers coming back. July the 4th, obviously we knew how the weather had been. Everybody who was on lockdown will have known the weather was fantastic. Premier League football was back on TV, brilliant. So we got a whole day of Premier League. So what do you normally do? You go to the pub and pent up demand, because we haven't been in the pub since the night of March the 20th. So we were getting feedback from our teams that they were a little nervous about opening up with all of these things happening. And it started off with I think in Nottingham, because it was the Notts Forest derby, local derby I think it was, and there was a lot of concern about suddenly everybody's going to come out. How do we manage this? You know, this is new to us to open on this day. Just a bit scared. So we asked the GMs, the general managers, what they wanted to do, and we basically said, if you don't want to open on the Saturday, we won't. And we actually ended up opening all of our pubs on the Monday. And you know, that cost us, I think that probably cost us about 10 million in revenue, but it was absolutely the right thing to do, because all of the goodwill we built up by staying close to our teams, by looking after them, by making sure they were safe, just said to them, we trust you, you know, we'll do what you think is right. And I think that's probably, there were lots of little examples during lockdown, but that to me is the most compelling one of the impact of listening to the team and then responding to them. We will finish this period up versus last year. So the fact that we've lost some of our tables, the fact that you can't have, my husband always laughs when I say vertical drinking, but you can't stand at a bar and drink. The fact that you know, we're not doing things in the same way we were because of the shot in the arm from Rishi Sunak. We will be up versus last year, and for that it's fantastic. So, but that also put pressure on the teams, because again, you know, they're not match fit, and all of a sudden they are busier than they've ever been. Our suppliers are weren't expecting it to be that busy. None of us were, but you know, again, it's great. And I think the reason why we've had that performance, first of all, because obviously Eat Out to Help Out was great incentive, but to be able to deliver against all the odds is that goodwill that sits in the bank from the work we did during lockdown, the communication we had, the fact that we furloughed everybody and made sure we topped them up to 80%, the fact that we set up a welfare fund for people who were really struggling. And I think, again, it was that authentic communication. When we didn't know the answers and we didn't have the answers, we were okay to say, we'll get back to you, and we did. And again, you have to follow through on that. This is probably the epitome of everything we're trying to do, is if we stick to our thought process around that. And there's lots of other examples, but this to me will be the main one. And this will be where if we fall back into old habits, we'll know that actually it was words and not beliefs and not values. Yeah. So I think we're all really conscious of understanding context, explaining context, and making sure people understand the why. And you know, Robin just said it, we're a performance business as well. So the two have to go hand in hand. And this model will not work if it's just about being nice to people. It has to be, you want to work here and you deliver a good performance. And so I think it's those two things that go hand in hand. But again, explaining the context, answering the questions, taking input. You know, we're not the experts in everything. So it's a multi-layered way of ensuring that we understand why we're doing things, we explain it, and we hold each other to account to be consistent in how we deliver.
It's nice to see Mike on the call, who's the academy manager at Worcester. But you know, one of the best stories I've heard in the past 6-12 months is, you know, of a club investing really heavily into one of their high potential young guys to then put him into a position to lead. Now, Patrick and the guys at Leading Edge have worked actually pretty closely with Ted for the last couple of years to try and, you know, develop these qualities specifically around leadership. And it just goes to show that the more you invest in individuals, they can surprise you. So when it comes to how I would operate in my role, how we would try and think within the RFU and within the pathways, like those two things, potential and people, are absolutely essential. Like I said, the clubs contract players, they are responsible for their day-to-day development, and quite rightly so, because they spend the majority of their time there. So, you know, the amount of time that I get to work with a player hands-on and directly impact them is probably only 20% of the time, if I'm lucky. So clearly there's a care piece in terms of each individual. However, if you can't have direct impact on an individual, you've got to start broadening the perspective in terms of the people you want to try and work with, influence, and also collaborate with. And again, I'll work through in terms of some of the strategies there, but within the role, it isn't just about care for players, and that's the purpose of that point. It's about caring and supporting and building quality relationships with probably the 10 to 15 people that surround that player. A little bit more in terms of the context, and it goes back to our original point in terms of, you know, we're in a performance business, so we can't apologise for the reason we're here and the reason we're all employed. So we can't, like, even if we wanted to, we can't separate performance and well-being, because they've got to be heavily integrated, because the performance side of things is present and it's not going away. I guess the difficulty is, one of the things which is unique about my environment is it's not necessarily, performance isn't necessarily defined by what happens on a Saturday in a results, or in a game on a Saturday or next week. It might be defined in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years time, and that's just what we don't know. So we've got to have a real process focused around our players in terms of making sure that, you know, we're aligning stakeholders. We've got really good grasp on understanding where players are, who they are as individuals, really getting clarity in terms of the direction in which we're trying to develop certain specific qualities to move players forward to a position where we think they can be competitive in 3, 4, 5 years time. However, that's not defined, and it's a challenge. Like, we don't know the end point. So Ted Hill, who you saw in the previous slide, you know, he's a captain now at 21, whereas, you know, there's a young player of his age that he's come through the age groups with that probably won't come through until he's 23, 24. However, I know full well that player in that environment is being perfectly well supported. If we're solely focused on outcome, then we're doing the majority of our guys a disservice, and we can pat ourselves on the back and say we brought 1 or 2 players through each season. Unless we're catering for the 95% that don't come through, and making sure they are growing in that environment, they're leaving better people, better players, with a broader skill set in life, then we've not done ourselves, or we've not done our job properly, in my opinion. So like I said, players aren't statistics, and for me that is central to everything. Like, we as staff, we've got to remember that we do this countless times. We work with 30, 40, 50 players every season, and we define ourselves by the one person that does make it, or the 2 people that do make it. Now, if we define ourselves by the 1 or 2 that do make it, then I don't think we're doing, I think we're missing the point, really. We should define ourselves by how we've created our environment, how we've coached, and by the thoughts and perspectives of the players that leave the environment. And like I say, as Belinda said, like, that player as a person is probably the number one thing, and it's easily forgotten because, you know, we wear a badge on our chest and we represent a team, and and if we're not careful, we're very quickly going back into an outcome focus and, you know, judging ourselves by the results we would get at a weekend. However, in reality, win or lose, and when you win with a player, in reality, things should never be that good, and when you lose, things should never be that bad. You're that consistent for that young player, and your responsibility is to be that constant regardless, and making sure that we are really facilitating and supporting those guys having balance to their life, and making sure that they're still progressing regardless.
It is 4:30 on the dot. So I guess just a really couple of bits that stood out for me, or just summed up. It was really interesting just hearing both speakers talk about the long term, and I guess within that, constant reference to people. And I think that concept of being people centered is easier said, but actually quite hard to unpack. And I think for me, that again, a lot of talk around values, and I'm hearing both people talk around, well, there's constant conversations, and I think they're about 2 things. Well, firstly, it's kind of understand who I am and who the people I work with are, and then I guess, well, what's the business about? And then there's a centering process to go, well, how do those join up? And I think there's some really good individual examples. accountable bit again stuck for me, and actually not just let's say accountable, let's work out how. So let's align it to those values. That what is this business? This who I am, and I think that requires two things. I think it requires some vulnerable moments where people were sharing, I am struggling. Which Belinda, you gave some good examples. Robin, you give some examples, or actually some moments to say, well, this is how I need to be spoken to be moved, or how I want to be spoken to. And I think that whole agility bit is coming up a lot now. And we keep asking the question, why is it come on COVID? And I think it goes back to those, because we haven't spent enough time investing in the people. Who am I? How do I need to move? How do we as an SNT or leadership team get around it? So look, fascinating. It's given me loads of stuff to think about. Well done. Well done to you two both. Thanks, Belinda. Thank you, Robin.